Well, welcome. I'm Chaplain Bill Ferris here at Bailey Chase, and we're looking at, for the fourth Sunday in Advent, the Sunday of Love. I thought we'd look at a wonderful story, the book of Ruth. For in Ruth, we see that God's Hesed, if you're familiar with that Hebrew word, Hesed, it is the word of acts as the corporation, loving kindness. And what's interesting is it's even beyond that. It is covenantal and determined and loyal, love and kindness and mercy and action. All of that put to action. And so this is the best way to describe God's loyal, steadfast, loving, merciful kindness to us, but it also is a great descriptor of what Ruth does for her mother-in-law Naomi, and then eventually to Boaz, and that Boaz and Ruth then connect a lot of dots and a lot of generations, showing God's Hesed through generations upon generations and his loving kindness for all of us. So, Naomi and her husband, Elimelech, there's a famine in their land, their family land, in Bethlehem area. So they need to leave. So they go down the hill, cross the river, and over to Moab. So leaving Israel and going to modern day Jordan. And they find food there. And they stay there for at least 10 years. Elimelech dies. And then it said 10 years that Naomi was still there, and that both sons had found wives, Moabite wives. Thus, if you remember, Moab was one of the sons of, was the son of the eldest daughter of Lot. And we'll get into this 10 generation thing. Cain kills Abel. God asked about it, and Cain says, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Obviously he was not, because he killed him. 10 generations after that, we get Noah's sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Noah was naked and drunk, and his sons covered his nakedness. And Ham, in particular, and his son Canaan are cursed because of this, which implies that there might have been something else going on there. And thus they weren't their brother's keepers either. But the two other brothers try to cover up for Ham and Canaan somehow. And then 10 generations after that, Abram, as in Abraham, and his two brothers. One of his brothers, Haran, dies. Right? And he has a daughter and a son named Lot. And Abram's other brother, Nahor, marries his brother's daughter, his niece, to take care of his brother. And Abram takes care of Lot, his nephew. So they're both trying to be their brother's keeper, take care of their brother and his children, and thus his lineage. So then, of course, Abraham becomes the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Israel as a nation, and the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob's 12 sons, come from Abraham, and their wives come from Nahor. But the late brother, Haran, had Lot, and his children, if you remember the stories, is he left Sodom and Gomorrah, stayed in the cave. His daughters got him drunk in order to preserve lineage. And so the oldest daughter's child was called Moab, from father. Terrible name, right? And so 10 generations then from Lot, we get Ruth. So we get 10 generations for Cain and Abel, 10 generations for Cain and Abel to Noah's sons, 10 generations from Noah's sons to Abraham and his brothers, and then 10 generations from Abraham and his brothers to Ruth and Boaz. Amazing. There's another 10 generations in here from the son of Judah and Tamar, who was illegitimate, Perez. 10 generations from him to David. And we know from Torah that if you have an illegitimate child, then they're not allowed in the assembly of God for 10 generations, which seems very steep penalty. But it's also a prophecy. In other words, that God had a king from Judah, line of the tribe of Judah is the line of the kings. And he had a king ready for them, but they weren't willing to wait for the 10th generation, i.e. David. They got impatient and they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, what you asked for. And so, but the rightful king that God had for them all along was David. And David's line obviously leads to Jesus, Yeshua. So, Ruth and Naomi, they're left. And Ruth's sister is Orpah. So Naomi doesn't have her husband. And now all she's left with is her two daughters-in-law, who are both Moabites, Orpah and Ruth. Orpah chooses to go back to Moab and to her mother and her family. Ruth, though, is determined to stay with Naomi, and she says this, which is the key passage of the book of Ruth. She says, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Great, great passage. In other words, a Gentile of sorts is saying, I'm choosing against my homeland and against my home family and against my home gods, and I'm choosing you and your family and your people and your land, and most particularly your God. Loving kindness. Because God has shown loving kindness to her, even though all these men died. So Ruth then goes with Naomi, and they go back across the river and up the hill and to Bethlehem. And when they get to Bethlehem, it is harvest time in the summer, the barley harvest. And that's why you typically read this during Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, in the summer, or what Christians usually know as Pentecost. And she gets there, and she catches the eye of a landowner in the harvest, Boaz. And she asks him, well, why have I found favor in your eyes? And he says, because I've heard of you. I've heard of your loyalty and your loving and your kindness to Naomi, who's a relative of him. And he appreciates it. In other words, he's not only seen her youth and her beauty, but he's seen her inner beauty and in her character. And he likes it. So he gives her plenty of the gleanings from the field, i.e. Food from the edges of his field, which is for the poor, the widow, the orphan. And both Ruth and Naomi are widows. He takes care of her. Naomi says, hey, he likes you. Here's what you do. Clean yourself up, get yourself a nice new dress, go out. Tonight at the festival, he's probably going to be a little tuned in, a little imbibed, a little drunk, and, proposition him. So she does, but in a respectful way. And he appreciates that. And he says, well, here's what you do. There is somebody closer than I. We got to take care of that. They do. And then they get the town elders to agree that he will not only take Ruth as his wife, but he will take Naomi's family land and redeem it. And thus, he's redeeming the land. He's redeeming Ruth as his wife. And he's redeeming Naomi as his relative, who's a widow, and he's going to take care of her as well. And so he promises to do all that, and he does. And in doing so, he brings all those generations upon generations and back together. Right? The brothers, Abraham and Nahor, whose lineage had led to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their wives, and then Haran and Lot and the Moabites, and thus Boaz and Ruth bring all those lines 10 generations later back together. And they also get this idea of the line of tribe of Judah as well. For their son is Obed, and then his son is Jesse, and then his 8th son is David, who then becomes the king. And it is David's line that leads to Jesus, Yeshua, the Messiah. Wow, a lot going on there. But it is Ruth's choice to leave her homeland, leave her mother, leave her family, leave her land, leave her gods, and her choosing Naomi's family, Naomi's land, Naomi's God, the God of Israel. Her loving kindness and loyalty is a great example then of God's loving kindness and loyalty, because through all these generations, 40 generations, 10 and 10 and 10 and 10, and are you your brother's keeper? God says, I'm your brother's keeper. I will take care of you, and I will give you what I've promised to give you. Just be patient. Not only will I bring back together the family lines and redeem your land and take care of you and take care of the widows, their son will be the grandfather of the king I promised you, who eventually leads to God himself as the Messiah, who sacrifices himself on the cross for us. What a wonderful, wonderful love story on so many levels. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you have a wonderful and Merry Christmas. And I hope you think about God's loyal, determined, loving, merciful kindness for you. And I hope you respond to him with loyal and loving and merciful kindness to God and to everyone else on this wonderful holiday season. Amen and amen.